Welcome to another episode of Prodigy Search Presents. Great privilege today to have a good friend of mine, Dan Griffis, who I've gotten to know over the last few years, President of Global Partnerships for the Oakview Group. Dan's been behind two of the largest facility naming rights deal in the history of really sport entertainment. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. I'll let you, I don't want to speak for your background, Dan, but as I look, it started out, you're still a youngster in my eyes, but with KPMG, I think initially out of undergrad, and spent some time with corporate strategy with Fortune 500 companies. Spent 8 years at Chip Ganassi Racing, which I presume that launched you at least in a greater depth in sports. Target for almost 5 years. I want to talk about that in a sec.
Yep.
And been at OVG for almost 5 years, which is hard
Crazy.
to believe. I think that's when I first met you, and
Yeah.
clearly it seems like it's gone by fast. You may say otherwise, but talk a little bit about your Target role. I know that really you had the purse strings to millions and millions of dollars. Tell me just a little bit, Dan, about your role with Target and how that moved you ultimately over to OVG.
Yeah, happy to. First, thank you for having me a part of your program. So look, if you kind of charted back and you kind of mentioned that career progression along the way, I don't think anybody says that their first job out of college is going to be the most perfect job for them. But yet, I think when you look back on those types of positions, it provides an important foundation for what, you have to know what you don't want to do before you have to, sometimes what you want to do. And KPMG, wonderful company, great foundation for understanding business, breaking down balance sheets, those types of things, led me to University of Michigan, and I got my MBA, which then led me to the professional sports world. And quite frankly, thankfully, I had a classmate and good friend, Tom Garfinkel, who's the CEO of the Dolphins, who shared the same passion, and that's what he wanted out of his career. And so I'm not sure if I would be in this specific job if I hadn't been influenced in some way, shape, or form by Tom. And so, we kind of set out on this path, and having the opportunity to work for Chip in the racing world certainly is a different space in professional sports. I don't think it gets the love that other stick and ball sports get. So there's always a chip on your shoulder, and not to excuse the pun of a chip, but there is a chip on the shoulder of a lot of people in racing because it's not as like traditional as the stick and ball sports. And so when it comes to sponsorship though, because sponsorship is everything in that sport. I mean, you don't get ticket revenue, you don't get TV revenue, you get none of that. Like if you don't have Target as your main sponsor, like Chip's team, that team goes away. I always used to say if you don't have the left field sign in Nikon for the New York Yankees, the Yankees are going to play tomorrow, whether or not that sign is there. And so you have to grind in the world of racing. I mean, it is a grind. And so I think it cuts your teeth on becoming more creative a little bit in terms of the solutions that you can provide to partners and what you're willing to do and push the envelope. And I think that, in terms of like creating my macro philosophy around service and what sponsorships could be, I think that was very helpful. I have a fundamental appreciation for all stick and ball sports now that we're involved in what we're doing, and there's nuances to both that make things significantly better for brands. But when I was with Chip Ganassi, every conversation I seemed to have in my life revolved around racing in some way, shape, or form. And I remember thinking like, look at all these other brands and what they're doing, and they're in FIFA World Cup, they're at TED conference, they're with the Grammys, they're doing the Oscars, they're doing so much other cool things to bring their brand to life. And yet I was pigeonholed into talking about racing all the time. And look, I loved it. I love the team. I love Chip. I love everything that organization stood for. But Target came calling because they were my main partner, and the CEO of the company at the time, Greg Steinhoffel, was a mentor.
Did you cut the Target deal for Chip Ganassi? Was it in place, or were you?
No, it was already in place. Yeah, Chip signed Target in 1990, and they were with him essentially from the very beginning. And there's another story I can tell at a different podcast about that, which is fascinating, and a tremendous amount of respect for Chip for that. But it was my like appreciation and understanding of where brands could go when they invest in sports entertainment and anything pop culture related, that really drove the conversation between me and Greg Steinhoffel, the CEO. And then they offered me a position to have the opportunity to be sort of the curator of pop culture for the brand, if you will, on a lot of fronts, and bring all that stuff to life. And so, it sort of opened my eyes to this entirely new world of fashion and CSR and grocery and entertainment and music and all the other things that you could potentially do in extensions for the brand. And it's sort of like, just sort of like eating one type of candy your whole life and then getting access to a candy store and like, oh my God, like I want that. And so, I had always like thought about, and I heard about different brands that were always sort of like lack of strategic thought, in the industry, as when you're on the sales side, you're like, oh, well, that company's spending money willy nilly and you should go approach them. And I always thought to myself, man, like if I ever had that reputation on the brand side of being somebody that was not strategic and just sort of spent money wherever, that would really make me upset and sad. And so, we built a great team at Target. There was already a great team in place. I stood on the shoulders of many incredibly creative and great people that came before me. And we took the brand, a notch up. And then the person that succeeded me took it a notch even further. And so it's one of those brands where nobody hates Target. Like you can find somebody that can pick at any product or service. Could be an automobile, it could be selling insurance, it could be mortgages, whatever it could be a fast food restaurant, but Target, every single person that I interacted with, like, I love Target, like they're great,
Great
like
brand. Yeah, great brand. Yeah.
And so when you appeal to such a wide audience, you have things that come to you. But one of the things that I also saw is that I was literally bombarded with phone calls and emails every single week to the tunes of hundreds, where every property was interested in doing a partnership with us. And so I got to see literally every major property, what they were offering, how strategic they were to position it to me, all those things along the way. And I think it always just struck me as how non-strategic people were in general in terms of how they approached me. And
you go from the sell side at Ganassi to the buy side at Target. And to your point, I know we had talked about this before in one of our earlier conversations a few years ago, and just to your point just there in terms of the unsophistication or professionalism, and not to point anybody in particular by name, but just in terms of those pitches you would get. It's
terrible. I mean, it's really, it really like struck me as like, well, you always think about whether you're good or not. And I'm not saying that we were the best at Chip Ganassi racing, because I think we always could improve. But it made me think, man, we were actually pretty good in terms of how we approach brands and how we thought about them strategically. I don't know if it was my MBA that I got at Michigan and like the training that it had, but Target actually, not just like the thinking and the understanding of how deals get done internally within a company of that size, and how we're like multiple stakeholders and how you have to get people to buy in, and the budgeting processes and all those things, and having that understanding. And now moving to OVG, and again, I most people thought I was ridiculous in leaving an officer job at a Fortune 35 company, and to join Tim and Irving in a what was a nothing company at the time, and the lights weren't even turned on, and I think they underestimated two things. One, they don't know Tim and Irving, and the fact that they are forces of nature, and generally speaking, on average, everything that they touch is normally successful. And so I've always tried to have a simple rule of thumb in my career, which was to always work with people who have a reputation of getting things done, right? And always have that reputation myself if possible. And so if you surround yourself with people who are accustomed to getting things done, by default, you should be one of those people as well. And so I took that as early advice that I got from people early in my career, and Tim and Irving fit that criteria perfectly, and what they were trying to accomplish and what they were selling me on, which was to make a dent in the sports entertainment universe.
It's amazing the vision, because like you said, 5 years ago, I remember hearing about Oakview Group around that time. I'm going, I clearly, Tim, to your point, and I know Irving a little bit from my days in LA years ago, but you can't bet against Tim. But early on, you were one of the first, 10 or dozen employees there, perhaps even earlier.
I was number 3. Yeah. Me,
Really?
Tim, and me, Tim. Well, actually, Francesca, Tim's daughter.
Yeah.
So I was probably number 4, actually, because Francesca came from Toronto with Tim and flipped the lights on with us. But yeah, we all flipped the lights on together the same
What
day.
was the pitch? I mean, hard to say no to Tim, but you were approached, and what was the pitch to tell you to come over and leave that Fortune 35 company, like you said, and come to? I mean, clearly Tim and Irving, I'm sure, were the big anchor behind that. But what was the pitch to convince you to come over?
Part of it was my entrepreneurial itch that needed to be scratched. I always felt like if I hung up my cleats one day, or skates, or whatever metaphor you want to use, that if I didn't have the opportunity to really try to build something from scratch, would I consider my career to be fulfilled? And so I always had that with me. I always thought that maybe post business school I would have immediately started in that path. But business school, if you don't get a job at Goldman Sachs or Bain or BCG, you're a failure. And so you get kind of pushed in those types of directions when you come out of a top school. And so, the fact that Tom and I went to Chip Ganassi Racing was different in and of itself. But I wanted this itch to be scratched at some point in my life. And if you're, I said, I joked with my wife because she asked me the same question when we were making the decision to leave Minneapolis and move to LA. I said, it would be the equivalent of me being a basketball player sitting on a park bench somewhere. It was a good player, but LeBron and Michael Jordan walked up to me and said, "We're playing a 3-on-3 game. Do you want to come and join our team?" And you're kind of like, yeah, like I can distribute the ball really well. I have skills that would complement you guys, not to your extent, but I like to be able to learn from you in that environment would be fantastic. And so you're on a lifelong journey of learning anyway. And so to learn from those two guys at a minimum sounded like something that was worth the risk. And some, you have to take risks in your life. Those people who take risks, I think are generally some of those that are more successful than others, or willing to put themselves outside of their comfort zone. And we're not out of the woods yet. We're only 5 years old. We still have a long way to go.
Well, and I don't know if it's fair to say this, Dan, but one thing I'm impressed with you is that you've got amazing results. I don't want to get into that in a minute, but you're kind of a guy that doesn't, want to stand behind the bright lights, doesn't get perhaps as much, and I don't say this out of disrespect to anybody,
Yeah.
but you may not get the kudos that you probably deserve because you're a quiet, likable guy who just kills it, and yet, doesn't look for the limelight. I mean, and the success you've drawn there and driven is massive. I mean, the two deals, the UBS deal was most recently announced, one for Belmont in the arena there. You clearly were behind Climate Pledge and the Amazon deal for the Seattle Arena. I know there's another one, I think, perking, perhaps maybe announced in the not too distant future, but that's massive. And yet, you go about it, you're modest and don't stand on mountaintops looking for accolades.
Well, look, I appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, look, there's a lot of people involved, and you, I live by a certain sort of credo. I remember reading a book when I was in high school about Teddy Roosevelt, and there was a quote that stuck with me from reading that book, which is do the best you can with what you have where you are. And I always thought, like, if I could just do that, I'm actually in a good spot, right? And so some people are stronger at other things, and some people are weaker at other things, but no one's going to out hustle me. I can guarantee you that. And so grit is something that's born over time, and you got to be born with it to some extent, but you develop it over time. Look, I don't have the showmanship of a Tim Lewicki. Not very many people do in this planet. What Tim is capable of doing, and again, Tim may be the best orator I've ever witnessed in my life, and I've seen some incredible people get up in front of a group of people and deliver amazing speeches. Tim, off the cuff, can whip out one of the most amazing, articulate, concise messages that is unlike anything you've ever seen. So having an asset like that on your side to do these sorts of deals is incredible. I mean, it's like a really strong tool in your toolbox to be able to do it. And he loves doing these sorts of things. And so I never set out to be like, I never set out to be the guy that, wanted all the credit. I want to certainly be recognized for my achievements at some point, but I get satisfaction out of, in these cases, building a great company, having a culture of people that love working together, that are accomplishing great things, that when they go home at night, they what this is while they're working with our company, and how they contribute to the overall good of the company. I mean, look, like when we started OVG and we signed a deal with Walmart, for example, who is one of my favorite companies in the world. And of course, with my time at Target, it was tough for me to switch that light off and switch the other light on. But no one had ever done a deal in sports entertainment with Walmart. And we signed them in a large deal across the alliance, and it broke through. How many do you think every sports property and entertainment property in the world is ever called Walmart? Probably, right? And so, the ability to break through there certainly gave us a lot of hope that maybe what we were doing is the right thing. And certainly my experience in retail helped out. And then you start layering on multiple deals. PetSmart came in with a big deal that they'd never done anything in sports entertainment before. Zoom invested in our company with the Arena Alliance when they were nothing. I mean, we're using Zoom today, and they're phenomenal people who have a great brand, and they've benefited from the COVID environment. And so they're taking off, and that's wonderful for those people. We like to think that we help them, get to that certain point. So I always look at it as, I've always believed that relationships matter, and that you should be investing in making more relationship deposits than withdrawals, first and foremost in your life. And many people I helped at Target, like, get on the shelf with their products, that ended up having beach houses and boats and fancy cars, and the expectation, well, first of all, it would have been illegal for me to take anything, but apart from that, I was happy to see them succeed. And I always felt like if you invest in relationships where eventually you're not asking for anything in return, you're just trying to help people along the way, that some of that stuff will come back to you when the time is right. And Walmart's a perfect example of that through my relationship with PetSmart, UBS, you name it. It's like, it just, people say, well, dude, that was really lucky. I'm like, yeah, well, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Well, your humility is standing out tremendously. That's who you are. Now, no naming rights deals don't happen in a matter of a couple of phone calls, clearly. So I'm sure the discussions with Amazon and with UBS were, perhaps, I'm going to assume, long before the pandemic hit around March. But nonetheless, to have those consummated and announced at a time when, the global economy is just, massively, losing trillions of dollars, extremely impressive. Talk a little bit about, perhaps the process there, not in terrific detail, Dan, but I mean, to announce those and have those, again, I assume those were, those take a while, those naming rights deals, those numbers, but love to hear your take in terms of having done those and completed those at a time when, the country is just, at a standstill.
Yeah. I mean, look, sometimes the fact that they're done now, I remark sometimes in private, like, wow, I can't even believe that got done. Like we have found something that's stronger than the virus, which is a vision for what we're trying to build, and assets that provide tangible long-term value for brands. And those are stronger. That's stronger than any virus that could get created. I always believed that to begin with, and we proved that to be true. These conversations, Amazon, it could have been 18 months, it could have been 24 months. Who's to say? Multiple iterations of that type of deal. UBS the same way. It actually, UBS started 4 years ago with a conversation. I invited them to the Grammys when we hosted it at Madison Square Garden, their CEO, and we got to establish a nice friendship. And over that time, we were waiting for the right opportunity to present something to them, and the Arena was seemed like the most logical choice, and off we went. And so to have two really strong global brands like Amazon and with with UBS to attach themselves to our projects lends us a significant amount of credibility, and a lot of hard work went into that. The huge, our Seattle team, the guys that we have in OVG Global Partnerships, Ryan Brock and Jeff Webster and Sam Morgan, they're phenomenal, and they did a significant amount of work getting us across the finish line with Amazon, and then Evan Levine and our team, Ian and Justin in New York. They're great people, and they all, again, it's about setting clear expectations and priorities in terms of what you're working on, what you bring to the deal. And I've always felt like because I signed 2 naming rights deals as a target. Like, not many people have been on the buy side for these deals, let alone then be able to sell them. So I always felt like I could draw on the experience that I had on the buy side, and then extrapolate that for the sell side. And so, I always believe, every naming rights deal you do, for the most part, even though we have 2 in Minneapolis, but for most part, the companies at first, they say, we never do this, and this isn't something we normally do. Well, before you do your first naming rights deal, everybody says that. Like, that's the truth. Like, you don't normally do that, but then eventually you do that. And so what I keep telling the team is, and this is just not with naming rights deals, but other ones, is you just have to keep whittling away at the reasons why this deal shouldn't happen, and answer all those questions and get rid of those things. And then eventually all that's left are the things that actually do work. And it's a reason, all these reasons why you should be doing it. And, we able to get there in a pre-COVID environment and post-COVID environment to get across the finish line with these deals. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to work with those 2 companies in some way, shape, or form, and really just to hopefully inspire the rest of the industry that these deals can get done. That again, the right vision and the right story can be stronger than any virus. And let's get going.
I love that phrase. That makes a lot of sense, and one in which I think resonates for sure, especially in today's age. You've alluded to it, so perhaps you've answered the question, but and I think sometimes we throw around culture, the word culture, we throw around the word, oh yeah, I got great relationships, and relationships are key. You talk about UBS, inviting them 4 years ago to the Grammys and building that relationship. Is there a secret? Is there a style, Dan, that you have built? Have fostered over the years that you find is successful? Again, I know relationships are key, and it's building those and building that trust. But anything that you can share that you feel is, here's what it's all about. Here's what gets us there, and maybe different from others, especially because you've been on the buy and now the sell side twice.
Yeah. Well, what I said earlier about I fundamentally believe in mutually beneficial outcomes, and I believe in making more deposits than withdrawals in the relationship world, and I think that has served me really well over the course of my career. I never really look at it, what's in it for me first, and that's the truth. I don't think that way, and so I think that some folks are in a rush to say, I got to get from here to here, and it's got to, if I don't get it done this quickly, then something's a problem. These are relationships that I've been nurturing for 20 plus years, right, of my entire professional life in some cases, to get to the point where the right opportunity aligns with the right story that they want to tell. And so I'm never going to my friends or colleagues and pitching them a bunch of stuff. Like, I just never believed in it. And unless it made sense to me, if I was sitting in their chair, would I buy it? Is the reason that I'll come to you. And it's not some fictitious, like, I got to get this deal done type thing. It's truly, if I was sitting in my chair at Target, would I buy this for the reasons that I'm selling it for? And is it the next best dollar that I can spend as an organization on what I'm trying to offer to them? And not just a marketing expense, but like anything that company can spend $1 on. Do I fundamentally believe that it's the best next dollar that they can spend? Then yes, then I'm going to take it to somebody, because I'm not embarrassed to come to a friend and say, I'm trying to help you. Like, I have actually a great idea for you. It may not align with what you're doing right now, but here's why I think it does. And if it works for you, great, let's go do something fun together. If not, then that's okay too. And so I've always felt like that type of approach, and people, like I said, they like, well, your Rolodex is massive. Well, I've nurtured it. It's the only, like, really, the only asset in your life that's really your own is your personal network and professional network. And it should be the most valuable asset. And eventually people will pay you money for who's in your network and who's not. Right. And so, if you build it the right way, then this happens. And so I keep telling some of the younger guys on the team, that the relationships that they're building today are eventually, in 10 years, they may pay off. And so don't be in a rush to get everything done now. Look, we have goals that we need to hit right now, so let's go work on those. But I'm just saying, like, these people will get this job and then they'll move to this job and then they'll move to this job. And so next thing you know, your friend is the CEO of this major company in 15 years. And so you've developed a relationship the right way where, you're not calling him all the time saying, or her all the time and saying, I've got something great for you, and they're just not going to take your call because they're sick of getting pitched by you. Like I just never felt that way.
No, you've done a good job of it. What, and maybe we talk about the pandemic and what we've gone through the last, I guess, I'm losing track now, 5 or 6 months. And what's been the biggest challenge? I mean, again, we talked about the massive success of announcing these 2 deals during the pandemic, but what's the biggest challenge you're facing now, Dan, in terms of the business? And clearly a lot of great growth with OBG, but what challenges you the most right now and what you're faced with and challenged?
Yeah, look, I mean, number one is keeping people on our team motivated and understanding their role in the larger puzzle, right? Like, you have to come to work every day understanding how you contribute to the overall success of the company. What you're doing is valued to that point, right? And that in this environment, there's a lot of distractions. You work from home, you're going for a run, you can go do that. It just, like, you have to have a fundamental trust and belief in the folks that work on your team, that they're doing the right things to move the ball forward, and you figure out how to create an environment where the machine just continues, right? So the first thing is always that challenge of making sure that people feel motivated and that they understand, and there's optimism and hope out there that's driving them to participate. You never want it to be like, if you're living in fear all the time of whether you're going to have a job or not, like, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy maybe that you don't have one anymore, and because you're not really focusing on what's contributing to the overall success of the company. And so I've been a fundamental believer in my entire life that sometimes you're just swept up as collateral damage in something. You know what I mean? It's not your fault. Like, you're just a part of something. We are all collateral damage to COVID right now. Like, none of us caused it, whether you believe somebody ate a bat in China or whatever the mechanism that started this entire thing. We're all dealing with it. And so we are all collateral damage. And some people are swept up in more collateral damage than others. But, like, whenever that comes, whatever day, if you're no longer working for your current organization or whatever, and it comes, to be able to hold your head up high and say, I did everything in my power to make sure that I was successful and that I did the right thing and that I was keeping the machine moving, then it makes it so much easier for you mentally to get to that next leap or whatever that next job is, because you were really just collateral damage. And so I'm challenged with that every day. I think, it's interesting. We just did a really big deal with Guaranteed Rate, which is a company out of Chicago, great company that does home mortgages. And it was a relationship that was 100% built through Zoom. I've never met them in person.
Wow.
And they're spending a considerable amount of money in sports right now across MLB, NHL, and NBA. And I have Andrew Feinberg and Jacob Rothman on my team, who did a wonderful job in developing that relationship. And it's turned out to be a killer deal from both sides. And we've developed a really strong working relationship that's incredibly successful. And it happened all through Zoom. So
Amazing.
If you're telling me that it can't happen through Zoom, or somebody gives me that excuse, I'm like, no. And if you're telling me that a company says that they don't put their name on stuff because that's not what they do, I point to Amazon and say, well, use the philanthropic initiative. They don't do it either. And if you're telling me that there's a company that's in financial services and they're in trouble and they're not pays, I'm like, well, then let's point to UBS. Like, they're a global company in financial services. Like, they figured it out, and we figured out the right story to tell. So it's easy to come up with excuses of why things aren't happening. And in some cases they're very valid. And I'm saying that we're exempt to that. I'm just saying it is possible. You got to think a little bit more strategically and be a little more creative. And those people who are focused on creative problem solving, and that's one of the skills that I look for when I hire people, is typically you'll find the right path, despite whatever environment you're in.
It's amazing. We could talk a long time about that, but our last 3 placements here, which has been started not clearly as long as UBS, some of your deals, but it started pre-March. Were essentially closed via Zoom. You're hiring people, you want to ideally see somebody face to face. But last 3 searches we've closed at CEO levels have been done via Zoom.
Yeah.
And one we finished with the Broncos and Denver Broncos, and they said, I've never hired somebody, without seeing them. And I said, the world we live, and who knows, God forbid that, we won't continue to live this way. Or to your point, it's okay to do a deal, and you can get a deal done over Zoom based upon the relationship you create in our virtual world. And that's a great story.
Well, look, people still need to sell things and people still need to buy things. And so that's not going to change whether you're in a virus or not. And there are companies that fundamentally believe in doubling down in times that are tough, and they steal share. Bob Ulrich, who was the former CEO at Target before Greg Steinhoffel, was the CEO when I was at the race team for a long time. And he was a fundamental believer in doubling down when times were tough, and focusing more on marketing and building share and developing the brand and instilling confidence and all of those things. And I remember that even when I was with the race team and I wasn't really working, for Target on their brand, but it always inspired me to say, like, yeah, like that makes perfect sense to me. Like, why wouldn't you go do that in times of trouble? If you have the means to do it, it's a little bit risky, but again, like I think fundamentally it makes perfect sense to me. And so if you can find industries that are succeeding in this environment, right? Home mortgages, people are refinancing mortgages hand over fist. They're trying to put more money in their pocket and less money in interest in these long-term loans. And so for what Guaranteed Rate is doing, for example, is they're helping people get more money in their pocket. That's like fundamentally the truth of what's happening. And so in some small way, they are actually helping communities across the United States become more economically healthy and taking advantage of low rates to be able to do that. And so I like those types of things, those are great stories. And I always felt like that's, that there are companies out there that are profiting and succeeding, not because they're offering things that are predatory, but because they're actually doing things that are great for communities out there. And so like, go find them and let's go figure out a creative way to establish a relationship with them.
To your point, the silver lining in what is a very challenging time for us, and not only in the country but the world. So those are great stories. And just for fun, I wrote down a note I thought I'd ask you because I just thought it'd be light. Is there a crazy story or a funny story, and I don't have a specific, but I did, just to lighten it up. Is there something that's happened in your career that you look back on and say, man, was that nuts? Was that crazy? Was that funny? And I survived it. And again, it's anecdotal, but thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a good question. I mean, the 9+ years that I work with Chip Ganassi provide so many stories I can't even relate to them. I mean, I didn't know very much about the racing industry. I'll tell you a funny story. So I started working for Chip, and I get invited with Chip to an event in Charlotte, which was all the Dodge teams. It was a party for Wachovia Bank, which is no longer existent, that got swallowed up by Wells Fargo in 2008. And we're going to this party. It was hosted by Wells Fargo. It was sort of the elite of the NASCAR world. I guess it wasn't just for Dodge teams. I think it was for everybody. Anyway, I was new to the team. I was new with Chip, and so I go into this cocktail party, and Chip was always kind of like, these are environments, Dan, where it's probably best for you to listen more than talk, right? Because you don't know as much about the industry. And I always took that to heart, and I did it the right way. So I would go to these cocktail parties, and I remember going to the bar one time, and I was ordering a drink, and this guy walks up to me and starts talking about Martinsville with the bartender, and I had just come back from Martinsville like a couple of weeks earlier, and he was talking about how Martinsville hot dogs are a big deal in the NASCAR world, and so I kind of laughed and I said, well, I ate one of those and they weren't as good as I thought they were going to be, as hype or whatever. And he's like, well, I probably had I don't even know, 5,000 of them. And I was like, holy cow, like that is ridiculous. And so we sat and talked for 20 minutes at the bar and whatever. And then I sort of went back to the corner that I was standing in while Chip and Felix Sabatis, the other owner of the team, were talking to other people. And Chip comes up to me. He's like, hey, what were you doing over there? And talking to Richard. And what could possibly you guys have to talk to each other about? And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you're talking to Richard Petty for the last 25 minutes. And I was like,
Oh,
that's who that was? That was Richard Petty? Are you kidding me? Yeah, because I never seen him without his glasses and his hat on. And so I didn't even know what he looked like. And Chip looked at me after I told him that. And he goes, hey, here's this story for you. He's like, don't tell anybody that story. It makes you look like an idiot. And so I remember I was like, all right, well, that's good. So, like sometimes you got to laugh at yourself a little bit. And Chip was right. But I, like being a newbie and not trying to be presumptuous, I was like, oh, well, like you've had 5,000 hot dogs.
5,000 hot dogs.
That's amazing. Yeah. But, it's that piece that you come up and you're like, wow, that was interesting. So I don't know if that fits the criteria you're looking for.
Oh, that's great. And again, it was just an anecdote. So last question for you. And we can go on forever about so many different things and your great history and what you've accomplished. But if you look back now 20 years and you clearly have done a lot with recent announcements, et cetera, what would you say your greatest success in your career has been today? You got a lot more to achieve, but if you look back, what would you say, I'm most proud of this?
Yeah. Like I think that I've done it the right way. It's hard to like put to say that because it may sound like cheesy or whatever, but I never took a shortcut. I don't take shortcuts. Like I don't fundamentally believe in that. I'm not adverse to working smarter versus harder. Like if there's a better way to do things, then let's go do that. And I feel like no matter what happens, I will look back and say, I did it the right way. Could I have taken more credit for a lot of things? Sure. Could I have made more money along the way in other things? Absolutely. Could I have worked with better people along the way? I don't know. I probably not. I've enjoyed every relationship I've had, and like there's never a perfect relationship. You argue with people, you disagree with them. It's called civil discourse. You get over it and you move on and off you go. It's not by mistake what's happened. Do you know what I mean? Like I was very deliberate in my plan of like foundation at KPMG, which led to the business school decision and which led to Chip Ganassi Racing and Target and now OVG. Like it's not like this, dart on a dartboard thing. Like every decision you make in your life has a probability attached to it in terms of it happening or not happening. And then the risk associated with, is it too risky or less risky? And so you're constantly computing that in your head with everything that you're doing along the way. And, you hope for the best. And I feel like that I've made better decisions that have resulted in better outcomes than maybe other people. And again, sometimes it's timing and luck. I remember the Target CEO telling me that you need to be at the intersection of preparation and opportunity. And if you could be at that intersection your entire life, you're going to be in a great spot. And I've always remembered that piece of it. But I think doing it the right way to me is more important, and having your integrity when the cleats are hung up or the skates are hung up or whatever. I could have maybe passed up on having houses in other cities and a cool boat, or a membership at Augusta at some point. But I like sometimes those things are meaningful. I'm raising 3 kids that aren't assholes, excuse my language, but that's a big start in and of itself. And I think that's that's doing it hopefully the right way too, and that they're productive members of society, and I think that's a good thing.
Dan, that's a perfect close, because it speaks to who you are. You humility. You're a humble guy. you're grounded, and congrats on all you've done. Congrats on, I'm learning some of your great takeaways and chatting with you here, even though we've had similar but not exact conversations throughout the years. So I can't thank you enough. I wish you great continued success. Clearly you got a lot more that I know you're going to announce, a lot more you're going to close, a lot more that you're going to do. Oakview Group is making noise and got a lot more on the plate. So I wish you continued success. Clearly, continued safety. You're out in Southern California and some of the harder hit spiked areas. So stay safe. But yeah, I can't thank you enough. Continued success, and appreciate the time.
Yeah, well, and if as a closing thought, look, what you've been able to accomplish at Prodigy and what the practice that you've built and all the successful job placements that you've made happen in the sports world to help people have a better career, better organizations for attracting the right talent. I mean, you serve an incredible purpose, and I couldn't give you guys any more of a thumbs up or an endorsement in terms of the job that you do in this industry. So thank you for everything that you do, and for keeping this industry full with the right people.
Well, I appreciate it. It means a lot to me. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. Stay safe and continue success.
Thank you. Okay, bye.